On today's Locked On Texans podcast, day 2 was full of satisfaction. We'll talk about that and how Joe Mixon and Danielle Hunter changes things for the Houston Texans.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. 3 welcomes is all y'all need this morning. The rest of the hype is going to come throughout the show. Y'all already should be excited for this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team.
Your redemption team.
Day.
Remember, yesterday was your cheat team. Today is the redemption team.
Listen, they had to open up their checkbook and open sesame. They spent some money. Day 2 of free agency. If this is your first time watching or listening to the Locked On Texans podcast, thank you for stopping by. We really appreciate it. Please subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And to all of our returning listeners, thank you for coming back as we continue to talk Texans here on the Locked On Texans podcast. We will end off today's show looking at who is still on the market. You should have some money left to play around with, so we'll see who makes sense for this team. We look at analyzing the signings from day 2, again, highlighting Joe Mixon and Danielle Hunter. But we open up today's show talking about how satisfying day 2 was. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. When we look at day 2, how satisfying it was. We look at Danielle Hunter, Cody. Breaking news.
We did it. We got one in the books.
we got a few in the books. Y'all don't want to give us credit for CJ. We was the first ones to break that here on the Locked On Texans podcast. But day 2 was satisfying. Right? Day 2 was a day of impact players. Day 2 was a day of, okay, well, now we see Houston really, making some moves. And by the way, guys, if you listen to the Monday episode, if you remember, I told you guys, look for Houston to really get active on day 2.
Yep.
And then now for day 3. And so, Cody, for you, satisfaction is a word. Satisfying is a word. But what is your biggest takeaway from day 2?
It goes back to something that you talked about leading up to free agency. I'm not going to lie. I bought into the hype. 70 million. People like Saquon Barkley and all these other big free agent names are on the market. The Houston Texans are looking sexy. I thought we was going to see the Houston Texans busiest day during day 1. And the guys, you remember on yesterday's show, I called day 1 the game changers, the guys and the players that can actually, get you to the game in New Orleans, in Los Angeles, basically the Super Bowl, making that leap into the AFC championship game, making that leap into championship contention. However, John, I like how you put it. Day 2 was impactful players because there's 2 ways I'm looking at this. One, maybe the Houston Texans believe that they already have their game changers. You look at CJ, you look at Will, you look at Tank, you look at Nico Collins, you look at Christian Harris, hopefully Jalen Petrie could put his name back in that book. But it's like maybe they already have their game changers. There's Stingley as well. But to and most importantly, John, for me, it goes back to what you've been talking about leading up to free agency. Nick Caserio is going to stay true to who he is. And the one thing, whether he was picking players at the bottom of the barrel or he's finally have an opportunity to bring in impactful players like we saw on yesterday, day 2 of the 2024 free agency, he stayed true to who he was. Because when you go back and you take a look at the players, the quote unquote game changers who signed during day 1 of free agency, those are the players who got what I like to call the NFL max deals. You're looking at between 3 to 5 years. I mean, Christian Wilkins, a guy that we talked about a lot on this show, he signed with the Raiders for what was it, like 5 years? Crazy amount of money. That is not who Nick Caserio is. He's a general manager. What's that term he uses? You look at the value and you look at the player and you try to, basically try to bring the players in for the right price. And that is exactly what we saw Nick Caserio and the Houston Texans do over the last 2 days. Because if you think about it, John, as of right now, they have made 10 free agency signing, excluding the players that they re-signed. Out of the 10 free agents, the only one who got a 3-year deal was Al Shazier. That's it. Even in the deal what they ended up trading for to get Joe Mixon, Joe is still, I think he has 2 years left on his contract.
1 year left. It's 1 year.
No, 1 year left on his contract. Everybody else has signed
I would
like a
say
1 year,
that I
2
would
year
expect
deal.
for Houston to. I'm sorry to cut you off. I would expect for Houston to look to maybe extend him for an extra year. So pay that salary that he's already on, and then give him an additional year, kind of like what he did. I don't know when, but remember how he did Rex Burkhead, like in the middle of the year, he gave him an extension, maybe something like that.
Which I'll be a hell of a lot more happy to give Mixon that extension than Rex Burkhead, but that's not neither here or there. But the only reason why I feel like El Shazier got that extra year is only because DeMeco Ryans already know him. DeMeco Ryans, have always talked highly of El Shazier. I mean, going back to the 2 games that the Texans played against the Tennessee Titans, I remember him just raving about him on the defensive side of the ball as to how the Tennessee Titans can potentially contain the Houston Texans, especially that first game that you played against them without CJ. But, John, I really do believe that is what these first 2 days of free agency was all about. Nick Caserio and the Houston Texans staying true to who they are. There's also 2 ways I'm looking at that. One, it could be a detriment because, maybe in the playoffs, maybe it's like, okay, maybe if you would have, decided to give, for the sake of this argument, Saquon Barkley that extra year or a little bit extra money, maybe you could have got that extra yard or whatever the case might be. It could be a detriment. However, the one thing that I respect Nick Caserio staying true for what he is, the one thing about being committed to these 1-2 year deals is never going to put the Houston Texans in a bind with bad contracts, because some of these contracts do not age well, and the Houston Texans have put themselves in a very good position where it's like, man, that's a bad contract. They can't trade it. There's crazy amount of dead cap if they cut X player. He's not going to be in that situation, especially considering the next 2 to 3 years, you got to start thinking about re-upping Stingley and Harris and, CJ and basically your true game changers who are already on this team.
Yeah, Nico will be due at that time. I'll say this, man. Throughout that process on Tuesday, the Houston Texans were close to signing Chase Young, right? And in that process, that deal was going to be, according to sources, similar to the deal that they gave Jeff Okudah. 1 year, right? $4.5 million. I can see them maybe bumping it to closer to $5 million, right? But basically, can you come in and prove your worth to this team type of deal? And we know that is Nick Caserio. And it just got, for Chase and who his agency, however it went down, the price just wasn't where Nick wanted it to be. And I was told that Nick just didn't want to get burned on a player that may not, turn out to be as impactful as they want him to be for the right price. It's always the right price. Come on down.
Can I say something to that really quick?
The right price. Absolutely.
I do wonder when you everything that you just said about Chase Young, everything that we know about Chase Young, I do wonder how much of his team was actually trying to get him paid. Because if you think about it, John, a lot of teams are hesitant to bring him in only because of the injury history he has had. And he is definitely, and due to the injuries, he is not the player who we thought was going to come in and be that next, great defensive end when he was drafted number 2 overall by Washington a few years back. And I'm interested to see, I think as of now, the top 2 teams that's looking into Chase Young. I know the Carolina Panthers and I believe the New Orleans Saints are the extra ones, but I want to see what deal he is going to agree to with the team. However, John, the one thing that I was surprised to know when we got that news, why is Chase Young on the market in the first place?
And on top of that, I want to know if Chase is going to bet on himself and maybe look to sign after the draft, right? To see if teams feel their needs. I don't know, but to talk about day two, go back to day two for the Houston Texans. Once that fell, I think Houston analyzed the situation, right? Understanding that what have we been talking about here on this show? If you're going to lose guys, how can you replace them?
Boy.
If you're going to lose productivity from guys that David Singletary, John Bernard, Cameron Johnston, right? Blake Cashman, if you're going to lose those guys, who are you going to bring in to replace that productivity or even get more out of it? And I also realized that for Nick, it was all about making sure, and we'll go back into this for segment two, but it's all about making sure that this team isn't going to get burned because the cost is too much. And I think for Hunter, right, you could say the $19 million for John Grenard was too much for a guy that has only performed, as a lot of you have said, for one major year in his contract year, and health has been an issue. But Hunter, for the amount that he got, was, I think, a perfect deal, right? Bringing in Joe Mixon, I think, was a perfect deal. Day two is satisfying because now you look at Houston being able to analyze the rest of free agency this period, and I think they have roughly around $22 million left in salary cap to use for free agency. And now the draft, now you look at it and say, okay, now we can see day three being the day where you fill in some of the voids offensively, right? Maybe looking to bringing in a weapon here, a weapon there. Day three is also a day where you can look at the safety market and say to yourself, okay, maybe now that you got these major signings out the way, and Danielle Hunter is the only major signing, but he's a big one. You're satisfied with that, and now we can fill out the rest of the roster through free agency and the draft. So I think that's why that's so satisfying to me, because now that you got Danielle Hunter out the way, you replaced John Grenard, was your biggest free agency loss. Now you can move forward with filling out the rest of the roster, which is super important. This show is also sponsored and brought to you by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend time in our lives wishing we had more time. Would you like more time to complain about Nick Casario, or do you need more time to apologize for your day one slander, right? And we are victims of that as well. But honestly, the real question is, what do you need time for? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze in that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters the most to you so you can do more of it. Very simple, guys. Give BetterHelp a try, especially if you're thinking of starting therapy. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible, convenient, and suitable to your schedule. You can do it in the car, right? Very easy to access. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get started. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers, to this Wednesday episode. Day two included. It included a few guys, right? Texans do sign former Ravens linebacker Del'Shawn Phillips to a one-year deal. He also played for the Falcons, Bills, and Jets. Has a career total of 60 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 2 fumble recoveries. Had 24 tackles in 17 games and 1 start last season for the Ravens. And so you look at that being a maybe special team piece.
Oh, yeah, he is. I want to say for his career, he has played like 72% of his snaps on special teams.
He's going to be special teams. Maybe a guy that you can see, in spurts come in relief for whether it's Christian Harris or newly signed Azeez Al-Shaair. But the big signings of the day, Danielle Hunter, 2 years with a max value of $51 million. $48 million guaranteed, $21 million signing bonus, salaries, again, fully guaranteed. He also gets a $1 million Pro Bowl incentive. He making some bread, right? So that is the major signing for Houston, and Joe Mixon was traded to the Houston Texans for a 7th rounder. $6.1 million on that contract. That deal carries over from his current contract with the Cincinnati Bengals. And again, I do expect for Houston to look to maybe extend him another year to give themselves some wiggle room at that running back position, while also still looking to find depth, whether it be a free agent or I can see them going to tie themselves to a young running back through the draft. But guys, when I look at the signing of Mixon and Hunter, to me, for Mixon offensively, this will be the best offensive line Mixon played behind probably in his entire career. And that says a lot, right? So you're looking at a running back who has been very productive for the Cincinnati Bengals. If you go back to last year, over 1,000 yards, 4 yards per carry, 9 TDs on the ground. The year before that, 800 yards, but he has hit 1,000 yards in his career 4 times. He has rushed for over 4 yards per carry in his career 4 times, right? And he's that major year in 2021, 13 TDs. That was on the ground alone. He's also a valuable option to, if things are getting tricky, the pocket is breaking down. Not Deshaun, excuse me. We're talking about Deshaun Watson in the break, so excuse me. But CJ Stroud can dump it off to him, and he's a valuable option in the passing game. On top of that, he's only 27 years old. So the Texans were linked to the likes of Derrick Henry. We know Derrick Henry is up in age, right? They still get a younger back. They still get a guy who can be explosive and who has played and been productive in a pass-happy offense. Is he Saquon Barkley when he's healthy? Absolutely not. I want to put that to rest right now. But Mixon can be a very valuable piece for this team. And I think he's going to come in. He has experience with Bill Lazor, right? Bill Lazor is still on his coaching staff. So he knows exactly what you can get out of Joe Mixon. And I think overall he's a good pickup for the Houston Texans. And who broke that? Who broke that news? But the big signing is Danielle Hunter, guys. His numbers speak for himself. He's a guy that is going to come in and not only replicate what John Gennard did, but just do it better, honestly. And we love John Gennard here on the show. I've been a guy that's advocating for John Gennard to come back. If you remember, it was John Gennard over Schultz for me. But they signed Schultz, and the moment they did that, I pretty much knew that John Gennard was going to be out. But 16.5 sacks last season, 83 combined total tackles. Before that, 10.5 in 2022. He has reached double digits in his career 6 times. So he's a guy that, he's a baller. And again, for him in Houston, age is a big thing. He's 29 right now. So that's probably why you didn't see a 3-year deal, a 4-year deal. They're playing it close. 2 years, we can either reevaluate what you did. And we know that Nick loves that value word in any form. We can reevaluate you and bring you back. But I like the idea of getting somebody of his caliber who has been as productive as he has to play on the opposite side of Will Anderson. I'm curious to see how much Will Anderson just kind of follows him around, right? Hey, man, how can I get better at getting after the quarterback? How can I get better with some of my pass rush moves? And John Gennard was getting better as a pass rusher last year, finding various ways to get after the quarterback. But Danielle Hunter knows how to get it done, man. That's what he's getting paid for. He is that good. And so you look at a vet now who's coming in on this team, who's been a dominant player in the NFL, nearly 88 career total sacks. That's huge for DeMeco Ryans. And now that D-line looks like this. Will Anderson, Lee Collins, Nico Autry, Danielle Hunter. Your backups as of right now, you still have Khalil Davis. You still have Heinrich is still on this roster who played very well for Houston, right? You got some guys on this defensive front that can rotate in and out and be very impactful for a team that will mirror exactly what their defensive coordinator / head coach want, and that's that mentality.
You already hit almost every single point that I wanted to hit for both Mixon and Hunter. But the only thing I'm going to add to your points, John, is this: Mixon and Hunter are also they were the most healthier and reliable options. And what I mean by that is, the one knock that kept going against Jonathan Grenard every time, we talked about the possibility of him bringing him back. Everybody, of course, know the story. Contract season, career year, by far his most healthiest years. However, everybody kept thinking about those first 3 years, especially last season, the 2022 campaign when he missed half the season with, I believe, was a foot injury. It was like, okay, can you stay healthy? What's your availability like? Almost the same way when you take a look at Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, as we know, a few years back sustained a ACL injury, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And not only that, almost every single year of his career, he has been hampered by knick-knack injuries. Both Mixon and Hunter, the only year, ironically, that they had battling injuries came in the same season, that 2020 season. Mixon missed a handful of games with a toe injury, and Hunter, as you guys know, missed all of 2020 and I believe half of 2021 with a neck injury. But over the last 2 seasons, he has played all 17 games, and Mixon has played close to all 17 games ever since he came back from that toe injury between 2021 and 2023. And for me, John, I also think that was another thing. I mean, of course, regardless of what their past look like, you always want to knock on wood. Hopefully, these men are able to stay healthy. Pause. Hopefully these men are able to stay healthy, but I also believe that played a big role into why Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans and the Houston Texans may have been a little bit hesitant to give Saquon Barkley that extra year and that extra money that he wanted to, extend John Grenard in the contract that he wanted. And that's understandable, especially coming off a season where this team was hindered and rocked by so many injuries. It's like, okay, maybe if we could sign guys who have, somewhat of a proven track record of staying healthy. Everybody already know one of the most famous quotes in sports: your best ability is availability. And when you take a look at these two guys over the last 2-3 seasons, they have been available for both of their respective teams, and hopefully they could continue that here in the city of Houston.
Absolutely. I think that's the best point, Cody. And for Houston, even for John Grenard, you didn't finish off the season all the way healthy. Now you did perform for us in the playoffs, right?
But he wasn't 100% though.
He was not 100%, and that also explains why we saw Houston take care of depth before they took care of anything else.
And
they won. And Noah Brown's back. Let's
Lord have mercy. And it's funny that you mentioned that, John, because I just go back a few weeks ago to where I asked Coach D'Amico Ryans at the NFL Combine, what is going to be the most important factor into building this roster for 2024? And it wasn't, trading up to get the top wide receiver in the draft or whatever. It wasn't, bringing in the most explosive player at X position. It was the most important thing, and his top priority and Nick Caserio goal entering the 2024 offseason was to add depth at every position, and that's exactly what they did as of right now.
You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy all your tickets for all your sporting events, music, comedy, theater events right near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. See the view from your seat before you buy it with views from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. With zone deals, you pick the section. Game Time picks the seats for big-time savings. And Game Time guarantee means you'll always find the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, Cody, who is still on the market for Houston?
Simmons. I still want the Houston Texans to address their safety unit beyond bringing back Lonnie Johnson Jr. No disrespect, but to me, man, I'm still just looking at the safety unit. I still have Simmons at the top of my list. However, just going back to what we've been talking about a lot on this show, Nick Caserio, Coach D'Amico Ryans, they'll stay true to who they are. As of right now, I don't know, what Simmons is going for, but if it's in the Houston Texans, let's say, year range, I'm not going to say price range, but year range as for like, like a 2-year deal, whatever, I say, get the deal done. But, what is about $20-25 million left in free agency as of right now, man. I that's my biggest top priority right now. And I know some people might be out there saying, what about wide receiver? What about wide receiver, John? I really think they're going to wait until the draft.
I don't know. That's a great. Man, so, and I think the wide receiver market is very underwhelming for the free agency.
What do you mean by underwhelming? Because I heard a lot of people say that.
So the T. Higgins isn't available, right? You would have to trade for him.
Trade,
right? You would have to trade for him. And for Houston, again, do we want to trade for a guy that we think we already have on the roster? Which is why Mike Evans didn't become a Houston Texan. Did we want to sign a guy to that massive of a contract for a guy that we think is already on the roster and we're going to have to pay next year, right? And they need to start working on the extension now, honestly, before their price gets too crazy. So after those two big names, right, we love Curtis Samuel, right? We love Darnell Mooney, who's just signed a deal to play elsewhere out of Chicago. We love some of those guys. But the fact of the matter is, hey man, what's your value? We gotta look at who this general manager is. What's your value to us, and does it make sense? So when I look at the safety market, I look at Simmons, I look at Diggs. Those are the two safeties that I think Houston should hop on immediately out of those two. They have the money to do so. Justin Simmons is 30 years old. Quandre Diggs is 31. But he balled last season. Hunter Renfrow is expected to be released. So you look at a guy that can possibly create separation. It's been a while since we've seen him actually featured in an offense that was competent, right? We know how bad it was out there with the Vegas Raiders. But I do think that there are some wide receivers available. Again, I still like Curtis Samuel. I still like Tyler Boyd. There are some options out there that I think for Houston – it would make sense to bring in, even when I look at Robert Woods, who's still on this roster. Right. I mean, if y'all can see my face, Bobby Trees should not be smoking up a roster spot. Right. He needs to be gone. But between Robert Woods and Noah Brown re-signed, that doesn't automatically make them 53-man roster, slot holders. We've seen this team sign guys and then release them, at the end of training camp. We've seen this team carry over guys from the previous year of deals and then they get released during training camp. So they still need to invest in their wide receiver position. And based off of what we've heard from them say, we want to get separators, Curtis Samuel, Tyler Boyd, Hunter Renfrow, and free agency are three names that I think make sense. Then you also look at Houston. I think they come out of the draft, and this is way too ahead, of course. I think they come out of the draft with Roman Wilson out of Michigan. I really do. Right? He's a guy that creates separation, very good hands, and he loves to block. That screams Nick Caserio. And I wanted to mention this earlier. When we talk about Nick Caserio, understand his background. We're seeing a lot of 1-2 year deals, 3-year deals. Not a lot of time on those contracts, and for a lot of these guys, not major payouts. Understand who he came up under, who his OG is. Value is a word that they really loved up in New England. And trust me, I know. So, but this guy's on a market that day 3, I think we'll see Houston between day 3 and 4, right? Because maybe they need to take a step back and say, okay, let's reassess everything. This is what we have left. Where are the rest of our weaknesses on this team? who's out there that we can bring in to help boost our weakness for the right price. Thank y'all for listening and watching the Locked On Texans podcast. We really appreciate it. Please be sure to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure you give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Make sure y'all follow Breaking News Cody on Twitter as well.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. I will be back in Houston later on today. Well, for tomorrow's show, I was in San Antonio covering the Rockets versus Spurs. Shout out to the Houston Rockets, 4-game road winning streak, trying to keep their playing tournament hopes alive. But as always, you can follow me on Twitter at Cody Davis _24. Once again, that's Cody COTY DAVIS _24. I think tomorrow will be the first time all week that John and myself will be recording at home. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.
Peace.